Silence isn't emptiness, it's control. In a world obsessed with opinions, noise, and validation, silence stands out not as absence, but as presence. When you're silent, people begin to notice your behavior instead of your words. They wonder what you're thinking. They feel the weight of your absence more than the value of your input. Most people speak to fill space, to feel significant. But those who master silence don't need to prove anything. They let the tension do the talking. And in that tension, respect begins. Because silence isn't passive, it's strategic, it's deliberate, it's dangerous. When you choose silence, you strip others of their ability to predict you. And unpredictability is power. They lean in, trying to decode your silence. Is it confidence? Disapproval? Indifference? The ambiguity makes them cautious. It forces them to pay attention. Loud people are predictable. They give away their intentions, their insecurities, and their thresholds. But the silent? They hold the room, without ever competing for it. They create an environment where their presence demands interpretation. And in that space, people begin to treat your words, when they come, as rare, valuable, worth listening to. That is how silence earns you respect. Silence gives you space to observe. While others are busy talking, defending, explaining, oversharing, you are collecting data. Their fears, their tells, their emotional triggers. The silent one isn't empty, they're calculating. They learn who dominates with noise and who hides behind it. And more importantly, they spot weakness in disguise. That's why true strength doesn't announce itself. It watches. Think of the people you respected most. Were they loud? Or were they composed, calm, unreadable? Silence is intimidating because it refuses to seek approval. It forces others to guess. And in guessing, they often reveal more than they intended. There's a reason predators move in silence. They don't announce their intentions, they act. The same rule applies to social dominance. When you remain silent, you eliminate unnecessary exposure. You stop giving people ammunition to use against you. Every opinion you share becomes a potential weakness, a future regret. But when you speak less, you control the flow of information. You become selective, intentional. People start to realize they can't read you. And what they can't read, they respect or fear. That's the paradox. The less you reveal, the more powerful your presence becomes. Not by force, but by restraint. Most people fear silence because they associate it with disconnection. But those who master it understand its depth. Silence doesn't mean you've withdrawn. It means you've become intentional. You've stopped wasting energy explaining yourself to those who aren't listening. You've stopped negotiating your worth in conversations that devalue it. When you don't speak, people project. They fill in the blanks with their own insecurities. And that's when your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects back everything they fear you might be thinking, but never say. That ambiguity grants you power. Because in silence, your influence isn't limited by your words. It expands beyond them. Silence magnifies presence. When you enter a room and say nothing, people become hyper-aware of your movements, your posture, your eyes. You haven't demanded attention, but you've claimed it. In a society addicted to constant self-expression, choosing not to speak becomes a rebellion. It unsettles people. It makes them doubt their own dominance. They start adjusting their behavior, over-explaining, trying to earn your reaction. That's power, not through noise, but through tension. Silence becomes the pressure point they can't escape. The more they fill the air, the more your stillness controls the rhythm. You don't need to speak louder, you just need to stop giving them more than they deserve. Most people don't realize how loud they are until they meet someone who isn't. Your silence holds up a mirror. They begin to notice how often they speak, just to be heard, to fill time, to feel important. But when you master silence, you don't need to prove anything. You create space, and in that space, people start revealing themselves. You become the still point in a spinning world. That kind of presence doesn't just demand respect, it creates safety, stability. The kind people silently crave, even if they don't admit it. Because your silence whispers something they've rarely felt. Control without chaos. Silence lets you reset the rules of interaction. You stop playing their game and make them play yours. In that pause, in that space you refuse to fill with noise, people lean in. They start to doubt their own certainty. They begin to question their value in your eyes, not because you judged them, but because you didn't react. Silence becomes the filter that reveals who's secure and who's desperate. And you? You stand unbothered, not above them, but beyond the noise. That's when people respect you, not for how much you say, but for how much you don't need to. Your silence creates contrast in a world drowning in noise. It's not just that you don't talk, it's that your stillness exposes the chaos around you. People begin to realize how frantic, reactive, and insecure they are when they stand beside someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't interrupt, doesn't rush to fill silence. That contrast is uncomfortable, but powerful. It repositions you without effort. They lean on your calm because they can't find it in themselves. And in doing so, they start to listen, not just to your words, but to your silence. Because it speaks to something rare, inner command. You don't need to speak to change a room. Your silence already does that. People begin adjusting themselves around you, not because you demanded it, but because you didn't. They feel the difference when someone doesn't seek approval, doesn't need attention, doesn't chase validation. And that difference becomes presence. You stop being one of many and start becoming the one they can't quite define, but never forget. Silence gives you that edge. Not by muting your voice, but by tuning into something deeper. The confidence to let your existence speak before your words ever do. Silence teaches discipline. It trains you to resist the urge to react, to defend yourself, to explain, to impress. And in that resistance, you reclaim power. Because every time you stay silent when the world expects you to speak, you're sending a signal. I don't need to be understood. That's terrifying to most people. They rely on being liked, on being relatable. But the silent don't chase relatability. They live in clarity. And clarity is magnetic. It draws people in not because you're trying, but because they sense you're anchored in something they don't yet have. Mastery over your own voice. The strength in silence is that it cannot be misquoted. It can't be twisted, taken out of context, or used against you. It holds no contradictions, no over-explanations, no weaknesses disguised as vulnerability. It just is. That makes it rare. And anything rare becomes valuable. Most people can't go 5 minutes without speaking. They fill every gap with nervous commentary or hollow affirmations. But when you choose silence, you separate yourself from the noise. You're not just heard differently, you're seen differently. You become the person who doesn't react impulsively, the one who waits, watches, and only speaks when it's time to shift the room. People are conditioned to expect reactions. They poke, provoke, and wait for emotional signals to confirm they've struck a nerve. But when you stay silent, even in the face of disrespect, you deny them that satisfaction. You become unreadable. And what's unreadable becomes unsettling. Because silence isn't weakness, it's calculation. It means you've measured the moment, assessed the cost, and chosen not to waste your energy. That unsettles people more than any argument ever could. They begin to walk on eggshells, not because you threatened them, but because you didn't. You showed them a form of strength they don't understand. Control without confrontation. True power lies in what you don't say, in the pauses, in the breath you take before deciding not to respond. That moment of restraint is where your dominance is born. Not because you're hiding, but because you're choosing. When people realize they can't manipulate you emotionally, they adjust. They retreat. Not because they lost, but because they never got the fight they were looking for. And in that, you win. Silence gives you leverage. You stop playing by their rules. You force them to operate in your stillness, your space. And that space, controlled by you, becomes a battlefield they can't navigate. Silence rewrites your presence. It signals that you are not available for emotional manipulation, for pointless debate, for shallow validation. You exist on your own terms. And that's rare. People begin to censor themselves around you, not out of fear, but out of awareness. They know your standards are different, that you don't engage unless it matters, that you don't speak unless it shifts something. And that makes every word you choose more powerful. Because when you finally do speak, they listen, not because you shouted, but because your silence made them crave your voice. And that's how respect is earned. Quietly, but completely. Respect built on silence is deeper than respect built on charm. Charm fades. Words are forgotten. But the memory of someone who held their ground without ever raising their voice, that stays, that haunts. Because silence creates legacy. Not the kind people celebrate openly, but the kind they think about when they're alone. When they ask themselves, why did they matter so much without saying much at all? That's the imprint of a person who has mastered the art of presence. Not through noise, but through restraint. Not through demand, but through discipline. They don't enter the room loudly, yet somehow, they never leave it. Most people mistake silence for absence. They assume if you're not speaking, you're not thinking. If you're not reacting, you're not aware. But silence isn't a void, it's a lens. Through it, you see more, feel more, calculate more. You become the observer in a world desperate to be observed, and that gives you an edge. Because those who can't stop talking are easy to predict. But the one who watches, quiet, calm, unreadable, that's the one who holds the real power. Silence isn't about retreat. It's about positioning. And once you're in position, you don't need to announce your next move. You just make it. The world rewards those who speak, but it obeys those who listen. Intentionally, strategically, quietly. In silence, you gather leverage. You learn patterns. You notice who lies to sound confident, who overshares to feel seen. Your silence forces truth to surface. People expose themselves to fill the void you refuse to fill. And in that moment, your role shifts from participant to architect. You're not reacting anymore. You're sculpting perception. Every look, every pause, every breath becomes deliberate. You're not just silent, you're in control. And they can feel it, even if they can't explain why. Power doesn't always come from dominance. Sometimes it comes from the refusal to engage. That's the paradox. You're not silent because you're weak. You're silent because you've already calculated the outcome. And the outcome doesn't require your voice. It only requires your presence. Silence is your armor and your weapon. It protects your intentions and exposes theirs. You let them speak while you study. You let them move while you position. And in the end, when it matters most, your one sentence will dismantle their 20. Not because it's louder, but because it was earned in the silence that came before it. In the end, silence isn't just a tactic. It's a way of being. A decision to step outside the chaos, not because you're afraid, but because you've already seen what lies beyond it. Those who speak the most often know the least. But those who master silence, they own themselves. Their emotions don't betray them. Their thoughts are theirs alone. That's where real freedom begins, not in being loud, but in being unshakable. So next time the world demands your reaction, ask yourself, does it deserve your voice or your silence? Choose the one that strengthens you, and let the noise wonder what you're thinking.